She steadied herself on her crutches, gold dress shimmering under restaurant lights, and whispered the question that required all her courage. "May I sit with you?" She didn't know the man she approached was Gene Smith, a mafia boss who never let anyone into his personal space, whose table remained empty out of fear, not courtesy. His dark eyes lifted slowly, studying her prosthetic leg beneath the hem of her dress, her trembling hands gripping the crutches,
Can I sit?
and something in his face changed so
course.
sharply that the
Please
entire
do.
restaurant felt the shift in atmosphere. What he said next didn't just break the silence, it broke her. It was a single cold word that made her eyes sting with humiliation. "No." And then, just as she turned to leave, he said something else that changed both their lives forever. He said her name, a name he shouldn't have known. And suddenly, everything she thought she understood about being invisible shattered completely. Before we dive into this story, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to witness is a mafia boss who's been secretly watching a woman he's never officially met. And when he finally speaks to her, what he reveals will absolutely destroy you emotionally. Trust me, you don't want to miss how one question in a restaurant triggers a chain of events involving hidden surveillance, a rival's assassination plot, and a love story that proves being broken doesn't mean being unlovable. Now, let's begin. The cold hit Sandra Bliss the moment she stepped out of her broken-down car 6 blocks away. December in New York was unforgiving, and tonight it seemed determined to break what little remained of her resolve. Each step on her crutches sent jolts of pain through her residual limb, the phantom aches that doctors promised would fade, but never quite did. By the time she reached the restaurant, her arms trembled from exertion. Her prosthetic leg felt like it was cutting into her skin, and the gold dress she wore clung to her like a second skin of regret. Gold, the same shade she'd worn 18 months ago, the same color that had shimmered under chapel lights before everything shattered. She wore it now as both defiance and memorial, a way of telling the universe she was still here, still fighting, even if some days she wasn't sure why. 18 months, she thought as she pushed through the restaurant's heavy door. 18 months since everything ended. The warmth inside should have been welcoming, but instead it felt suffocating. The restaurant was beautiful, all crystal and candlelight and Christmas elegance. The kind of place David would have brought her for their first anniversary. The kind of place where whole, happy people celebrated life. She didn't belong here, not anymore, but she couldn't walk another block. Not tonight. Not in this cold. Not with her legs screaming and her crutches slipping on icy sidewalks. She just needed to sit. Just for a few minutes. Then she'd find the strength to make it home. Heads turned as she moved into the dining room. She felt the weight of their stares. That particular combination of curiosity and discomfort that followed her everywhere now. Whispers started, barely concealed behind raised wine glasses. A woman in an emerald dress leaned toward her companion, eyes lingering on Sandra's prosthetic before quickly looking away. "Don't look at me like that," Sandra wanted to scream. "I'm still human. I'm still here." She approached the first table with an empty chair. A middle-aged couple sat there, their plates nearly finished. "Excuse me," Sandra began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Would you mind if I—" "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman interrupted, her smile tight and apologetic. "We're actually saving that seat for someone." Lie. Sandra could see it in her eyes, but she nodded. Moved on. The second table. A group of business associates in expensive suits. "That seat's taken," one said before she could even ask, not bothering to look up from his phone. The third table. The fourth. Each rejection landed like a physical blow. Each turn back. Each sudden excuse. Each lie wrapped in false politeness. Chipped away at the dignity she'd fought so hard to maintain. David's laugh. The way he'd reached for her hand in the car. "You ready to save the world, Nurse Bliss?" he'd teased. The little girl running into traffic. Sandra's instinctive sprint. The impact. The screech of tires. David running after her. The second car. His body hitting the pavement. Her leg crushed beneath twisted metal. His hand going limp. Then darkness. Then waking up in a hospital room, learning that the man she loved was dead, and the leg that had run to save a child was gone. Sandra stumbled, catching herself on her crutches. The flashback hit her like it always did. Sudden, visceral, stealing her breath. She stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, fighting tears, fighting the urge to collapse, fighting the question that haunted her every day. Why did I survive when he didn't? The pain in her leg intensified. The stares grew heavier. Her will to keep trying faded with each passing second. Maybe she should just leave. Maybe she should just... Then she saw him. A table in the corner, a man sitting alone. Dark suit, darker eyes. A presence that radiated danger so palpable that the tables around him sat conspicuously empty despite the crowded restaurant. His face was handsome in a harsh way, sharp jawline, olive skin, dark hair, perfectly styled, but it was his eyes that caught her. Dark, intense, carrying their own weight of unspoken burdens. Everyone else avoided him, gave him space, kept their distance as if proximity alone might be dangerous. And maybe it was. Maybe he was exactly the kind of man she should fear. But Sandra was too tired to care, too desperate to be cautious, too broken to fear being broken further. Desperation overriding every instinct for self-preservation, she moved toward his table, toward the one man in this room who might say yes simply because he had nothing left to lose. Or perhaps because, like her, he understood what it meant to be alone in a room full of people. Sandra stopped at his table, her crutches planted firmly on either side of her trembling frame. Up close, he was even more intimidating. All sharp angles and controlled power, the kind of man who commanded attention without asking for it. His dark eyes lifted from the untouched glass of whiskey in front of him, and for a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to hold it despite the fear that crawled up her spine. "May I sit with you?" Her voice was small but steady, not begging, not apologizing for existing, just asking, one human being to another. His eyes studied her. The crutches, the prosthetic leg partially visible beneath her dress, her trembling hands gripping the handles, her face exhausted, vulnerable, defiant. The silence stretched. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then Gene Smith spoke, his voice low and cold enough to freeze blood. "No." The single word landed like a slap. Sandra's face crumbled. Humiliation burned through her chest. She turned to leave, vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. But then he spoke again, and the words stopped her completely. "No, Sandra, you will not sit here, you will sit with me." She froze, turned back slowly, confusion and shock warring on her face. He knew her name. This stranger, this dangerous, isolated man knew her name. "Tell me," Gene said. His voice still cold but now carrying something else beneath it. Something that sounded almost like recognition. "Why did you come tonight?" Sandra's carefully constructed walls shattered. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not from rejection, from being seen, from being known by someone who shouldn't know she existed. "How?" she whispered, voice breaking. "How do you know my name?" Gene gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Sandra. We have a great deal to discuss. And you're not safe standing there where everyone can see how much you're trembling." This is the story of two broken people who found home in the last place they ever expected, in each other's carefully guarded hearts. Sandra lowered herself into the chair with practiced care, angling her body so the prosthetic wouldn't catch on the table leg. She positioned the crutches against the wall within easy reach, never out of reach. That was the rule, and folded her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. The restaurant's warmth pressed against her skin, making her hyper-aware of every stare, every whisper, every moment. She occupied space in this beautiful room full of whole people. Gene raised one hand without looking away from her face. A waiter appeared instantly, as if summoned by invisible threads. "The lady will have the butternut squash ravioli," Gene said. "No pine nuts, extra sage butter, and sparkling water with lime, not lemon." Sandra's breath caught. Those were her exact preferences, down to the citrus specification she never bothered mentioning because restaurants always got it wrong anyway. "How did you—" "You're wondering how I know." Gene's fingers drummed once against the white tablecloth, and Sandra noticed his knuckles for the first time. Scarred. Badly. The kind of damage that came from repeated impact against bone and concrete. Violence. written in scar tissue across hands that now held a whiskey glass with aristocratic grace. The dress, he continued, his dark eyes never leaving her face, never once dropping to her prosthetic, to the crutches, to any of the broken parts everyone else couldn't stop staring at. Gold. It means something to you. Sandra's defenses rose automatically. How could you possibly? Because you're wearing it like armor. Like if you're beautiful enough, people won't notice what you've lost. The words hit like a physical blow. Sandra felt tears threaten, fought them back with the same stubborn will that had gotten her through 8 months of physical therapy, financial ruin, and grief so profound it had its own weight. You don't know anything about what I've lost, she whispered. Jean leaned forward slightly, and the candlelight caught something in his expression recognition, maybe, or shared pain. I know you lost your leg saving a child named Lily from being hit by a car on Madison Avenue. I know your fiancé David died 3 days later from injuries he sustained trying to reach you after the second vehicle hit. I know you blame yourself for both, for running into traffic, for the chain of events, for surviving when he didn't. And I know that for 8 months, you've been surviving but not living. The restaurant noise faded to white static. Sandra stared at this stranger who knew intimate details about the worst day of her life. Details that hadn't been in the news reports. Details she'd only shared with her therapist and David's mother. I came here tonight, Sandra heard herself say, voice distant and strange, because I'm tired of hiding. Tired of only going to places where disabled people are expected. I wanted to sit in a beautiful restaurant and eat expensive food and pretend I'm still the person who deserved beautiful things. You do deserve them. Jean's certainty was absolute. More than most people in this room. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know what you did. Selfless. Immediate. You didn't hesitate when that child ran into traffic. That's rare. Sandra's hand shook harder. Who are you? She whispered. And why have you been watching me? Jean was quiet for a long moment, his scarred fingers turning the whiskey glass in slow circles. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. I was 3 blocks away when it happened, 18 months ago. I heard the impact, both impacts. By the time I arrived, emergency services were already there. I saw you on the pavement, your leg crushed. Still trying to reach for David. Still trying to save him even though you were dying yourself. Sandra's breath stopped. She remembered none of that. Those minutes were lost to shock and trauma. The child you saved was crying, unharmed, held by a paramedic. You'd thrown her clear. Perfect instinct. Perfect sacrifice. Jean's eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you. So I had someone look into your recovery. You had someone, Sandra's voice cracked. You've been watching me? Yes. No apology in his tone. I watched you fight through physical therapy when the pain made you scream. Watched you work 3 jobs to pay medical bills that should never have been yours to bear. Watched you refuse to quit, even when quitting would have been reasonable. He pulled a slim folder from inside his jacket, slid it across the table. Sandra opened it with shaking hands. Payment records. Her prosthetic, $45,000, marked anonymous donor. 6 months of rent receipts, all paid by a shell company she'd never heard of. A contract with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the best physical therapist in New York, noting fees covered by private benefactor. You, Sandra whispered. This was all you. I want nothing from you, Jean said before she could speak. I want things for you. There's a difference. You saved a child at catastrophic personal cost. And the world gave you nothing but bills and pity. That was unacceptable to me. Anger and gratitude warred in Sandra's chest, each emotion trying to dominate. You had no right to invade my privacy, to make me some kind of project. No, I didn't. But I would have been homeless without that help. Her voice broke. I would have had a substandard prosthetic that barely functioned. I would have lost everything. I know. Why? Sandra demanded. Why would someone like you care about someone like me? What do you want? Jean leaned back, and something almost vulnerable crossed his features. Because I know what it's like to lose everything trying to save someone you love. Because watching you refuse to break reminded me that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting up anyway. Because you deserved better than what you got. Who are you? Someone who recognizes courage when he sees it. Jean's expression shifted, became almost gentle. But here's the real question. Sandra, now that you know I've been watching, are you more afraid of me, or of the fact that being seen by me feels better than being invisible to everyone else? The truth hit her like cold water. She wasn't afraid. She should be terrified this man had surveilled her, invaded her privacy, controlled her life from the shadows. But for the first time since David died, someone saw her as more than her trauma, more than her disability, more than a tragedy to pity. Before she could answer, Jean's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his entire demeanor changed from controlled to coiled, elegant to lethal. We need to leave. Now. He stood, already scanning the restaurant. What? Why? Jean's voice dropped to something cold and final. Because the reason I know so much about you is the same reason someone else does too. And they don't have good intentions. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Tribeca, accessible only by private elevator that required both keycard and fingerprint. Sandra watched Jean's thumb press against the scanner, heard the soft chime of acceptance, and felt reality tilt further into surreal. Armed men nodded to Jean as they passed through the entrance hall. Not security guards, soldiers. She recognized the difference in their posture, their awareness, the way their jackets hung heavy on one side. You're scared, Jean observed, guiding her toward a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Terrified, Sandra admitted. Should I not be? Probably. But you're still here. He poured her water without asking, added lime without prompting. Why? Because nowhere else felt safe. Because running meant pretending the last hour hadn't changed something fundamental. Because for the first time since David died, she felt seen rather than pitied. Tell me the truth, she said instead. All of it. Jean sat across from her, and the confession came with unsettling calm. Victor Romano. Rival family. Months of surveillance after Romano's people noticed Jean's unusual interest in a disabled woman with no apparent connections. The danger. Immediate and escalating. You're telling me I'm bait, Sandra said flatly. I'm telling you that my attention made you visible to people who use vulnerability as currency. Jean's scarred knuckles tightened. I'm also telling you that I won't let them touch you. Because you feel responsible. Because I care. Simple. Absolute. And because you deserve better than being collateral damage in someone else's war. Sandra should have run. Should have demanded he take her to a police station, a hospital, anywhere but deeper into his world. Instead, she heard herself ask, what do I do now? You let me protect you. And you decide what kind of life you want to build while I do. The art gallery job offer came the next morning. Legitimate business, Jean assured her. The building was clean, the art was real, and Sandra's art history minor from college barely remembered until now made her qualified. I need someone I trust, Jean said. Someone smart enough to recognize value and brave enough to defend it. She started that afternoon. Within 3 days, she'd reorganized inventory systems that hadn't been updated in 5 years, identified 3 pieces that were criminally undervalued, and fired a sales associate who'd been skimming. You're terrifying, Jean said, reviewing her work with something like awe. You have no idea. But Sandra smiled when she said it. The kiss happened on night 6. They'd been reviewing contracts in Jean's study when Sandra noticed an eyelash on his cheek. She reached up without thinking, and his hand caught hers gentle, questioning. I shouldn't, he murmured, but didn't let go. You deserve better than what I can offer. What if what I deserve is someone who sees me? Sandra's voice was steady despite her racing heart. Really sees me? The kiss was inevitable and impossible, gentle at first, then deeper, acknowledging something neither had named but both felt. When they pulled apart, Sandra's crutches had fallen, and she didn't care. Jean's phone shattered the moment. His security chief. He listened, and his expression went cold and lethal. They found the first bug. In your apartment. Horror crawled up Sandra's spine. Which means they've been listening to everything, every conversation, every private moment. For how long? Months. Jean's voice could have frozen blood. We're moving you tonight. Full security detail. And Sandra? His eyes met hers with absolute certainty. I'm going to find whoever did this, and they're going to regret it. Sandra woke in unfamiliar darkness, reaching instinctively for her prosthetic before remembering she was in Jean's guest room. Moonlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating her crutches propped against the nightstand, and the photo that had fallen from her wallet onto the white sheets. David smiled up at her from the worn image. Taken 3 months before the accident, before everything shattered. 18 months. Not long enough. Still yesterday. Still fresh enough that the guilt of last night's kiss felt like betrayal carved into her chest. The tears came silently, the way she'd learned to cry without sound, without permission to break completely. Sandra. She looked up. Jean stood in the doorway, wearing sleep pants and nothing else. The tattoo she'd glimpsed at his collar extended across his chest and shoulders, intricate, beautiful, violent. I heard you. He stepped into the room, careful not to crowd her. May I sit? She nodded, incapable of words. Jean lowered himself to the edge of the bed, close but not touching. His eyes found David's photo, and understanding crossed his features. I had a sister, he said quietly. Marie. 8 years old when my father's enemies killed her. I was 15. Old enough to have protected her. Too young to know how. Sandra's breath caught. Grief doesn't have an expiration date. Sandra. And loving again doesn't erase who you loved before. David loved you enough to die trying to save you. Don't you think he'd want you to live? I feel like I'm betraying him by wanting to be happy. The words tumbled out. He died because I ran into traffic. Because I chose to save a stranger's child instead of being safe. And now I'm feeling things for you, and it's only been 18 months. You're betraying him by wasting the life he died to preserve. Jean's certainty was absolute. He didn't save you so you could spend the rest of your existence punishing yourself. How can you know what he would have wanted? Because I know what I would want if our positions were reversed. I would want you alive, Sandra. Fully alive. Loving again. Being loved. Not just surviving. Sandra clutched David's photo, and the confession came like poison finally purged. We were fighting before the accident, about my nursing career. He wanted me to quit, to be less independent. He said I cared more about strangers than about him. And her voice broke. Part of me felt relieved when he died. Relieved that I didn't have to keep fighting about it. What kind of person feels relief when someone they love dies? Jean's hand covered hers, warm and steady. A human one. That doesn't make you bad, Sandra. It makes you real. And it means you're not choosing me to replace him. You're choosing me because you want me. That's all I need. The kiss was different this time, deeper, more certain. Jean's hands found her face, her shoulders, the curves of her body with reverence rather than urgency. When his fingers traced the edge of her prosthetic, he didn't hesitate or flinch. He just touched, acknowledging without pity. They made love slowly, carefully. Two broken people learning to be whole. Jean mapped her scars like they were sacred. And Sandra felt beautiful for the first time since she'd woken up missing parts of herself. Afterward, wrapped in sheets and each other, Sandra asked the question she'd been avoiding. If this gets worse, if staying with you puts me in real danger, will you let me go? Jean was quiet for a long moment, his hand tracing patterns on her shoulder. I'll do whatever keeps you alive, even if it means losing you. That's not what I asked. I know. His voice carried the weight of terrible honesty. But it's the only answer I can give. Okay, everyone pause for a second because I need to address something. If you're watching a story about a mafia boss who hired private investigators to watch a woman for months, paid for her prosthetic leg anonymously, and then confessed all of this over dinner without her running screaming and you're still not subscribed, I'm genuinely concerned about your decision-making skills. Hit that subscribe button right now because we're about to get into surveillance bugs, rival mob bosses, and a shootout that proves why you should never underestimate a woman with ER nurse training. Also comment, Team this is romantic or Team this is a restraining order waiting to happen? I need to know where you all stand. Okay, back to the danger. Jean's security chief arrived at dawn with a tablet full of evidence that made Sandra's blood run cold. Victor Romano, Jean began, his voice clinical despite the fury in his eyes, isn't just a business rival. He's a sociopath who's built his reputation on finding what people love and destroying it. Slowly, methodically, he discovered my interest in you 4 months ago, 2 months before we met at the restaurant. The tablet showed surveillance logs, photos of Sandra leaving her apartment, entering physical therapy, struggling with grocery bags. Dates stamped across months of her life. 6 listening devices in your apartment, the security chief reported. 3 cameras, bedroom, bathroom, living room. They've been active for approximately 16 weeks. Sandra's stomach turned. 16 weeks of being watched, sleeping, crying. The nights she'd struggled with her prosthetic, cursing and sobbing in pain. The mornings she'd stared at David's photo and wondered if living was worth the effort. All documented, all recorded. They have communications, Jean continued, each word harder than the last. Romano's men discussing Smith's weakness, planning when to strike for maximum damage. The photos were worse. Sandra sleeping, vulnerable and unaware. Sandra crying in the shower. Sandra struggling to attach her prosthetic, her face twisted in pain and frustration. Every private moment of suffering cataloged like evidence. I'm going to kill him, Jean said simply. I'm going to make it slow and public and… No. Sandra's voice cut through his rage. You're not. Jean stared at her. Sandra, he violated you in every possible way, short of physical touch. He watched you suffer for months. And if you retaliate with violence, you prove you're exactly what people think you are. What I should think you are. Sandra's hand shook, but her voice steadied. Give me options, real ones. Jean's expression shifted surprise, replacing fury. He gestured to his security chief, who stepped back. Option 1. I give you a new identity, money, placement in another city. You disappear completely. You'd be safe, but you'd lose everything. Your name, your life, any chance of… He stopped. Of us. Option 2. You stay. Full protection detail. You live in my world. Accept the danger and the moral complexity. You become part of this whether you want to or not. Option 3. We use you as bait. Let Romano think his plan is working while we prepare to destroy him. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Then, Option 2. But with conditions. Jean's eyebrow raised. I get full information about threats. Not filtered, not protected. If someone's planning to hurt me, I deserve to know. I get self-defense training, weapons training. I participate in planning my own security. And I keep the right to walk away if the cost becomes too high. You're negotiating with me. I'm refusing to be a passive victim. There's a difference. Sandra met his eyes. I'm choosing to stay, but I'm choosing on my terms. Something like respect crossed Jean's face. He was nodding when his phone buzzed. The security chief answered his own device simultaneously. Both men's expressions went deadly. What? Sandra demanded. Jean's voice was ice. Romano made his move. He has Lily. The world tilted. The child? The little girl I saved? He took her from school 2 hours ago, left a message. He'll trade her for you. Alone, unarmed. Or he kills her. Sandra's face went white. Then she grabbed her crutches and stood. Determination overriding terror. Then let's go get her. Sandra. This is a trap. I didn't lose my leg saving that child just to let some monster use her like a chess piece. Sandra's voice was steel. This is what it means to be in your world? Then I'm in it. Fully. Now tell me the plan. Jean's tech specialist held the prosthetic leg with clinical detachment, pointing to an almost invisible seam near the knee joint. Here. Sophisticated. Military grade. Probably active for 8 months, Sandra whispered. The room spun. Since I got it fitted. The technician was on Romano's payroll, Jean said, his voice deadly calm in a way that promised violence. He's been listening to everything. Every word we've spoken. Every plan we've made. Sandra stared at the prosthetic, this piece of carbon fiber and titanium that had become part of her body, her identity, the physical proof she'd survived. And it had been weaponized, turned into a tool to hurt her, to hurt Jean, to steal every private moment she'd clawed back from the wreckage of her life. Her hands started shaking and couldn't stop. Sandra, Jean reached for her. Don't. Her voice broke. Don't touch me. I've been carrying a listening device attached to my body for 8 months. Every vulnerable moment. Every time she couldn't finish. The violation was too complete, too absolute. Jean's expression went cold as winter. Find the technician. Now. 2 hours later, Jean returned with information extracted through methods Sandra didn't ask about. Romano's full plan. Use Lily as bait, kill Jean, capture Sandra alive to break her slowly while Jean's organization watched helplessly. Timeline 24 hours. Sandra was processing this when Jean's security chief burst through the door. Already moving. They're coming. Now. They heard us discover the bug they know we know. We have maybe 5 minutes. Jean grabbed Sandra's arm. There's an exit through the service corridor. We take separate cars. Rendezvous at the Queen's safe house. Jean, no arguments. Move. The escape was chaos choreographed into precision. Jean's team split half with Sandra, half with Jean. Different vehicles, different routes. The plan should have worked. Sandra's SUV made it 4 blocks before the first impact. The crash wasn't cinematic, it was brutal physics. Metal screaming, glass exploding, Sandra's crutches flying. Her security detail returning fire through shattered windows. The driver shouting coordinates. Another vehicle, Jean screeching around the corner. Jean emerged already firing. His team laying down cover. Someone hauled Sandra from the wreckage. She saw Jean moving toward her. Saw him turn to cover their retreat. Saw the bullet hit him. He staggered, but didn't fall. His hand pressed to his side came away red. But he kept moving. Kept shooting. Kept protecting her until they were in the remaining vehicle and racing toward Queens. The safe house was modest, a 3rd-floor walk-up that smelled like old carpet and new fear. Jean collapsed on the couch the moment the door locked. Blood soaking through his shirt in an expanding dark stain. Sandra's ER training overrode panic. Towels. Clean water. First aid kit if there is one. Now. Jean's security chief moved fast. Sandra tore open Jean's shirt. Her hands steady despite everything. Entry wound left side. Exit wound back. Through and through. The bullet had missed major organs, but he was losing too much blood. Sandra. Jean's voice was weak. Leave me. Get to safety. Romano wants you alive. Shut up. She applied direct pressure to the entry wound. Her other hand reaching for the towels being handed to her. I didn't let you die in my head for 8 months just to let you die in reality. You should. I should save your life. Then we're going to save Lily. Then we're going to make Romano regret he was ever born. Sandra's voice was steel wrapped in fury. Now stay conscious and tell me where your personal doctor is. Because you're not dying on me. Not today. Not ever. Sandra's hands moved with methodical precision, applying pressure to the entry wound while simultaneously assessing circulation, breathing, consciousness. Years of ER training overrode terror, transforming panic into protocol. Elevated pulse. Blood pressure dropping but stable. Wound is through and through. Missed the kidney by maybe 2 inches. She packed the wounds with gauze from the first aid kit, her voice steady. You're lucky. Stupidly. Impossibly lucky. Don't feel lucky, Jean gasped. Then feel grateful I know what I'm doing. Talk to me. About anything. Your childhood. Your sister. I need you conscious. So Jean talked. About Marie. 8 years old. With dark curls and a laugh that could light entire rooms. About being 15 when his father's enemies took her. About holding her small hand as she died because no one came in time. About building an empire from rage and grief. Ensuring he'd never be powerless again. Sandra's the first person since Marie I've cared about more than control, he whispered. If Romano kills you to hurt me, I'll burn his entire world down. But I'll still have lost everything that matters. Sandra's hands never stopped working. Then, we don't let him win. We save Lily, neutralize Romano, and survive this. Together. Because I didn't find someone who sees me as whole just to lose him to a coward with a gun. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived 30 minutes later, assessed Sandra's work with professional approval. Another 20 minutes and he would have bled out. You did exceptional work. Jean looked at Sandra with something like awe. "You saved me. You've been saving me for months. I'm just returning the favor." While the doctor worked, Jean's security team spread maps and surveillance photos across the safe house floor. Lily's location, a warehouse in Red Hook. Romano's expected strategy, isolated ambush. Jean arriving alone and wounded. Jean's actual strategy, 3 teams, simultaneous assault, overwhelming force. "I'm going with the extraction team," Sandra said. "Sandra, Lily knows me. She trusts me. I'm the only one who can get her out without her being paralyzed by fear." Sandra's voice left no room for argument. "I'm going." Jean studied her, this woman who'd entered his world broken and was becoming something fierce, and nodded. The assault happened at 3 a.m. Jean, bandaged and medicated but still moving, led the primary team toward Romano's location. Sandra, flanked by 3 of Jean's best operators, approached the warehouse's east entrance, where thermal imaging showed a small heat signature. Child-sized. The guards never saw them coming. Sandra's team moved with surgical precision, silent shots, cable ties, controlled entry. And then Sandra saw her. Lily. 7 years old. Terrified but unharmed. Huddled in a corner with a blanket. "Lily?" Sandra kept her voice soft, non-threatening. "Remember me, sweetheart?" Recognition flickered. "The lady who pushed me? That's right, you're safe now. The bad men can't hurt you anymore." Lily ran to her, and Sandra caught the child with her free arm. Crutch braced for balance. The extraction took 4 minutes. By the time they reached the secure vehicle, Lily was crying but safe, clinging to Sandra like a lifeline. Across the warehouse, Jean found Romano in his office, surrounded by files and screens showing surveillance feeds. The fight was brief and brutal. Jean wounded but fueled by protective fury. Romano fought back with desperate violence. But Jean's rage was colder, more focused. He wanted to kill him. Every instinct screamed for it. But Sandra had asked him not to become a monster on her behalf. So instead, Jean delivered Romano to federal agents with evidence that guaranteed multiple life sentences. In Romano's office afterward, Jean's team found the rest. Plans for trafficking Lily after using her as bait. Detailed torture protocols for Sandra. Expansion schemes involving forced prostitution of vulnerable women. Sandra stared at the files, horror giving way to cold determination. He wasn't just targeting us. He was going to hurt so many others. Jean pulled her close, careful of his bandaged side. "Not anymore. He's done. And we're going to make sure no one else suffers what he planned." Can we all just acknowledge that Sandra performed emergency trauma surgery on a Mafia boss with towels and a first aid kit, then immediately helped plan a tactical assault on a warehouse? If you're not subscribed after watching this woman go from, "May I sit with you," to, "I'm saving your life, and then we're going to war," I don't even know what to tell you. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and comment. Did Sandra go from damsel to warrior too quickly? Or is this exactly the energy we needed? Let me know. One more chapter, the resolution. 6 months passed like accelerated healing, painful at first, then gradually stronger. Romano faced federal prosecution with evidence so overwhelming his lawyers recommended immediate plea bargaining. Multiple life sentences. No possibility of parole. Sandra testified once, her voice steady, as she detailed the surveillance, the violation, the terror. Jean sat in the gallery, his presence a silent anchor. Lily returned to her parents with trauma counseling arranged through the foundation Jean established in Marie's name, the Marie Smith Foundation for Child Protection. Sandra helped design the programs, ensuring resources reached families who needed them most. Jean's empire transformed slowly but deliberately. He maintained legitimate businesses, the art gallery flourished under Sandra's leadership, and used his connections to protect vulnerable populations. He was still powerful, still dangerous when necessary, but more strategic, less brutal. Sandra recertified as an ER nurse and volunteered at a trauma center twice weekly. She also started advocacy work for disabled individuals, speaking openly about her prosthetic, her accident, her recovery. No more hiding, no more shame. Their relationship deepened into something neither had expected. Equal partnership built on mutual respect and hard-won trust. They developed a code, Are we okay? A check-in to ensure neither felt controlled or diminished. The answer was almost always yes. Lily visited monthly, calling Sandra the brave lady and Jean Mr. Serious face. They'd set up a trust fund for her education and made sure she knew she always had protectors. 6 months after Romano's arrest, Jean took Sandra to Valentino's. The same corner table, the same soft lighting, but everything else had changed. Sandra, the first time you walked up to my table, you asked if you could sit with me. Jean's voice was steady, but his hands betrayed nervousness. I said no, because I didn't want you sitting somewhere you didn't belong. I wanted you sitting with me as my equal, my partner, someone who chose to be there rather than someone asking permission. He pulled a small box from his jacket. You've been doing that every day since, choosing to stay, choosing to fight, choosing us. I'm asking you now to choose permanently. Marry me, not because you need my protection, you've proven you can protect yourself and me, but because I love you and I want to build our life together officially. Sandra's tears came freely, happy ones this time, not broken. You know what I regret? Jean's face showed immediate concern. I regret that I said, may I sit with you that first night. I should have said, I'm sitting with you. I should have trusted what I felt from the beginning, that you saw me when no one else did. That being broken doesn't mean being unlovable, that we could build something whole together. She took the ring, slid it on her own finger. Yes. Absolutely yes. But on one condition, you let me save you as often as you save me. Equal partnership, remember? Always. 1 year later, the Foundation's annual gala filled a ballroom with donors, survivors, and advocates. Sandra wore a gold dress different from the memorial one, celebratory rather than defiant. Her prosthetic was visible, and she didn't hide it. Lily attended with her parents, healthy and thriving. Jean pulled Sandra aside during dinner. Do you ever regret it? Saying yes to all of this? Sandra touched her wedding ring, smiled. I regret saying may I when I should have said I will. I regret the time I spent thinking I was broken beyond repair. But I don't regret you. I don't regret us. You taught me that being broken doesn't mean being unlovable, it just means we understand how precious it is to find someone who helps us heal. They danced Sandra's prosthetic, no longer a limitation but simply part of how she moved through the world. Jean held her like she was precious, but not fragile, loved but not possessed. Later, as they prepared for bed, Sandra asked, will you sit with me? Through everything that comes? Jean pulled her close. Always. You're not just sitting with me, Sandra, you're home. They fell asleep wrapped together, her prosthetic resting on the nightstand, 2 broken pieces that had built something whole. Proof that the deepest scars often lead to the most profound healing. If you made it this far without subscribing, I don't even know what to say. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me your thoughts and drop where you are watching from.